We're going to do a quick panel discussion around software supply chain, secure software supply chain, not just any old supply chain. I'm joined today by three distinguished panelists, Anne-Marie Fred, Andy Block, and Rob Szumski. Before we get started, why don't you all real quick introduce yourself for who's here, and then we'll jump into it.
Yep, I'm Anne-Marie Fred. I work on Red Hat Trusted Application Pipeline, which is a software as a service that we use to build Red Hat products internally. And then we also have a preview version of that for public customers to play around with a little bit right now. And that's been for the last couple of years. Before that, I worked on the IBM Marketplace, which is the part of IBM that sells a lot of products online, and I was the DevSecOps lead for that. So I was in charge of automating the supply chain security for that portion of the company.
Hey everyone, Andy Block. I'm a distinguished architect in Red Hat's Global Services Office of Technology. I work with our customers. I want to hear about what's going on in the field, but I also work a lot in the upstream community. One such community I do work in is a project called SigStore. How many of you have heard of SigStore? So I'm a contributor to SigStore, primarily focused on their Helm integration, because I'm also a Helm core contributor. So helping the teams within Red Hat bring in the SigStore ecosystem so we can be able to provide a product moving forward. So really happy to be able to participate today.
And hey everyone, I'm Rob Szumski. I am the CEO and founder of EdgeBit, which is a software supply chain platform. And what we try to do is help folks cut through the noise of vulnerability management. So you're hit with a fire hose of fix this, fix this, fix this. And we try to get you the answers of you should fix these 10 things right now. And the way that we do that is understand how your application actually runs, like in the Linux kernel deep inside there, and then export that information back into your pull request to help you make good decisions.
Very cool. Thank you all. Rob was also one of the original three at CoreOS who became part of Red Hat. He was part of the Red Hat OpenShift product team as well. So all these folks have sort of deep expertise in this community, a number of them. How many of you are either building software or part of teams that are building software? How many of you like to make life easy and just pull things off a Docker hub? Right.
Admit it. Admit it.
How many of you would say today that you have some defined supply chain within your organization, something that you could point to and go, that application came from these parts? Maybe.
Bash script, Jenkins file, GitHub action.
All right.
Something.
So I'm gonna start, and again, feel free to ask questions. We don't want this to be sort of just one directional. I'll start and throw this out to any of you. If somebody's getting started in this space, so they've heard about one of the hacks, or they've had to do a fire drill because Log4j happened or something happened. What are some of the common starting points? What are some of the common tools that companies use as they're looking at software supply chain or securing their software supply chain? I'll start with you, Anne-Marie.
The first two things I always start with are known vulnerabilities in the software that you're building, and known vulnerabilities in your container images that you're using. And I want to make sure that we're checking those vulnerabilities every time we run a build and unit test cycle, so that we can see when we're introducing new problems. And I also want to be checking it continuously for software that I'm not building today, what's already been deployed. So for that, I would use something maybe like Renovate or Dependabot if you're in GitHub, for example.
I would say understand your dependencies. I can tell you that every single piece of software, almost every single piece of software, is going to have some type of library that they're using. So understanding what library you're using, more and more organizations, more and more projects are creating software bill of materials. Try to emphasize ones, because two things. One, you'll understand not only what's inside those dependencies, but you will then understand that the group, the organization, etc., has security in mind, that they're actually producing a software bill of materials. So just understand exactly what you're consuming.
Yes, I agree with that. We're big on SBOMs and actually try to use them and parse them, whether that's like a tool. Don't just file it in an S3 bucket somewhere. You need to actually, if you're going to go fix a vulnerability, understand transitively where it actually comes from, and an SBOM is a great tool to do that.
Yeah, so We got a smattering of hands as we asked some of those early questions. You mentioned the term SBOM. What is SBOM? Give us a little information.
Software bill of materials. This is like the ingredient list to what's inside of a piece of software. And if you think about like the things that you need to know is, all right, ingredients are great. I have some allergies maybe to things. So let's map those ingredients to the allergens. And then if I want to avoid those, how do I actually do that? Those are your vulnerabilities. And so you need to enrich it so that you know, oh, that version of curl is not good. That version of this library is not good. Or maybe I don't like the way that the repo looks for that dependency. I'm pulling in some Java package and like, they got some weird binaries in here, or they don't do regular releases on GitHub. I don't like any of that. I'm not going to include that anymore. That's the type of enrichment that you need. You don't just have the ingredients. You need to make some sense out of it.
Yeah. Andy, you probably travel as much as anybody I know. You talk to as many companies as anybody. Obviously, people are at different stages of figuring this out. What are some of the sort of crawl, walk, run things that you recommend to people? So you go in, you start asking questions. What's the process you sort of mentally go through to help figure out, are people really bad shape, pretty good shape, I could optimize them? What's your thought process?
A lot of it comes down to just assessing where they are in their journey.
Yeah.
Look at software development itself is a journey. I look at many organizations, some are still building on their laptops. It's crazy when you think about it. We have systems like Jenkins, GitHub Actions, Tecton, you name it. They're still developing using their own systems. That's number one, because you then introduce potential vulnerabilities anywhere. You go from there is, okay, maybe we have a mature organization. How can we amplify them? And I go back to what Rob said when it comes to producing SBOMs. I use the analogy of Seinfeld. How many of you have seen the Seinfeld episode where they're at the car rental facility and they have a reservation but they're unable to fulfill it? I find that to be a very good analogy of the software supply chain, where you're going ahead and generating SBOMs, et cetera, but are you actually checking for them? When you're looking at the deploy your software, is there any validation and any policies that you're actually enforcing? So you're only halfway there, and that, I look at different organizations and kind of judge them and look at them and seeing, okay, where in your journey are you? And keep in mind, don't do everything initially. You will fail miserably. Don't try to, and I always say it, don't try to be Netflix, don't try to be Uber. Face it, you're not going to be Uber, you're not going to be Netflix. I'm sorry. However, take some of their traits, and that just by introducing 1% of what they do will make a big difference in your organization.
Yeah. You, as you mentioned in your introduction, you're both an operator and builder. You've done this before, you've done it for a while. You're now helping us build technology that we expect other people to start to use. As you think through, because this can be a lot of tools, there's a lot of options, there's a lot of tools. How do you think about sort of the categories of tools? If you're making your list of, here's what I need in a system that's going to help make me secure, what do those tools look like? What's your thought process for looking at them or evaluating them?
Well, we want to think about tools that make sense at various points in the software developer lifecycle, right? Yep. So we have tools that plug into your IDE. Mm-hmm. Then we have tools that you run at build and test time. Yep. So for example, your static code analysis will happen there. Checking for known vulnerabilities will happen there. We have tools that run on a deployed copy of your software, like your dynamic application security testing. And then we have tools that are used to monitor the software in production, whether that's things like a web application firewall, or, for example, like the Dependabot and things like in Renovate that will keep your software up to date over time.
Yeah. Do you, did you find through your experience, like let's say you're given a finite amount of budget, and they go, hey, Marie, go make it secure, and you go, okay, well, I only have a finite amount of money. Do you tend to sort of spread the money across all those things, or do you find more bang for the buck in the testing side of things or the production monitoring side of things? If you have to prioritize.
Like what do we actually find problems with?
Yeah.
So certainly the known vulnerabilities was number one. I would say that the dynamic application security testing was also right up there. Every time we would point that at a new piece of software, a new website or web app, it would find misconfigurations that result in vulnerabilities, and then we would fix those. Yeah. The static application security testing is helpful. I'm a little more hesitant about it because there's such a huge problem with false positives that I don't send people down that path first. because
Yeah.
you run the tools and you get these massive reports, and you don't even know where to start sometimes.
Right.
I'm trying to think if I'm missing a big one. What do you guys think?
I would just say, like, the whole shift left idea, the reason it exists is because it's much cheaper to fix things on that side. And so if you can spend a little bit of money and, like, nip the problem, like, release it early, that's always going to be cheaper.
I have a customer that I've been working with who did not decide to shift left, even though we emphasized, please get us involved with your security team. Well, 6 months into the project, we now have the security conversations, and now we are dragging on an additional 3 months because we have a whole load of security items we have to go ahead and assess.
Yeah.
And sometimes, like, your compliance stance can change based on just, does the code actually land in the main branch or not? And so if you can catch something in a pull request before it's, like, officially part of the product, now you can, like, cut off all the investigation and going and sitting in front of all your committees and, like, whatever. It just, because it never made it in, you stopped it before something happened, which is great.
One of the things that you've been working on, Rob, is this challenge of, if I start looking at my dashboards, everything could be red. There could be all sorts of things that test out as vulnerabilities or identify as vulnerabilities. You're sort of looking at kind of a streamlined version of that. Talk a little bit about this idea of, like, go after priorities versus sort of looking at it as a giant bucket.
Yeah, as Anne-Marie said, you run a container scanner and it's going to hit on a whole bunch of things. What our platform tries to do is understand how that container runs in production and then start suppressing those vulnerabilities that don't matter. So those are either false positive or things that are dormant. And so you can cut down to, like, maybe 8% of the actual things that you need to investigate, because investigation is, like, it's real time. There's a stat that's, like, it takes 50 minutes to, like, understand, remediate, and fix a single vulnerability. And it's like, okay, go fix these 10,000 issues, or a large bank might have upwards of 1 million known vulnerabilities. How do you ever burn that backlog down? You just have to be ruthless at prioritization. And that's what our platform helps you do, is here's 10 things you should absolutely fix right now.
There's also an open source project called VEX, the Vulnerability Exchange, that tries to cut down and really highlight which components are actually vulnerable. As you mentioned, I travel quite a bit. Are you going to cancel your flight because the tray table is broken? Probably not. I hate the airline if you cancel my flight because the dang tray table is broken. But if the hydraulic system is broken, I'm probably going to want to cancel that flight or at least get that repaired. Yeah. So same thing when it comes to the vulnerability exchange. It really highlights what's very critical, which ones aren't critical, and then based upon your posture, you can decide whether it's going to be a change that you need to make or one that you can either put to the back burner or whenever you want to address it, or maybe not even address it at all.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier the idea of shifting left. So two things. Number one, for anybody who's not familiar with that, what does that mean? And then second, we're seeing more and more of this idea of platform engineering teams, right? Like putting platforms underneath this so we don't have to burden developers with so much. So help us understand shift left, and then what are you seeing as some of the sort of early wins for this platform engineering model from a security perspective?
That's me and Rob.
I don't know. Go for it.
So number one, shifting left means that we all know DevOps. It's been popular for almost a decade at this rate. Introducing security into the DevOps story is shifting left. You're getting ahead of the security challenge before you even think about releasing software.
Okay.
And very specifically, like, the left is, I have a pipeline over here where code is being written, it runs through something, and the right is production. So shipping as far towards the code generation as possible.
Right, so the farthest left would be like your actual development environment. We have plugins that can help you see vulnerabilities then, and then you keep going from there.
Yeah, right. So stop making security the end of the train and the thing that could say no at the end and surprise everything.
Because it's way easier to make a fix when your brain's in the middle of whatever you're doing at the time.
You've been part of platform teams. Where have you seen platform teams and sort of the security function start to make things move faster as opposed to sometimes being a bottleneck? How do you put the right guardrails in place, for example, to let developers keep developing and security is just part of the fabric, if you will?
Yeah. One thing that I've seen happen in person is a maturity from an expectation that you would have releases that happen on certain dates and not very often to an expectation where you're going to have things continuously released, for example. So the way that we enable the security checks to happen in that sort of environment is that they have to be continuous. So they have to be integrated into your unit testing, your builds, and your deployments. And along with that, we've had to take our corporate security standards and sort of reshape them to fit with that, right? So instead of having a lot of paperwork that teams have to generate on every release, we expect them to have teams that generate the records that help us track that the proper things have happened.
Yeah. So take the advisory boards out of it, make it just part of the release process, and digitally document and so forth.
Right.
Yeah.
And what's really magical when that happens is like a SOC 2 audit or a FedRAMP process or ISO 27001 could be happening and your engineers don't even know it or they don't care because it's just part of the fabric. And that's like ideal. If you've ever been through a really bad SOC 2 audit, for example, it sucks.
Yeah, we've obviously spent a lot of today talking about AI aspects of it, surface level. A lot of the tools that we have today for software scanning and so forth are from known libraries, so a Node library or Python library. What's the early thinking in the industry for these big AI models, where the amount of data or the model itself is kind of obscured, it's kind of a black box. Is there any thinking yet about how software supply chain is going to apply to like a model from a data perspective, or is data sort of outside of software supply chain as a whole?
I'd say it's kind of like outside of like the nuts and bolts of today, but the same ideas are in existence where you care about the provenance of where this thing came from. You want some attestations maybe around who produced it and how it was produced and exactly how it's intended to be used. And all that can be codified into machine readable code that we can go check at runtime and things like that. That's all the same stuff we do with our binaries and our containers. So data is just one more little bit of bits.
I'll ask one last question of each of you. We're sort of wrapping up. Best advice, you get 2 minutes to ask, to give to anybody who's been here for the day. If this becomes part of their charter, they have to secure things, allow the team to continue to go faster. Just based on your experience, sort of best advice you can give somebody, fairly quickly.
All right. So my advice is don't put it off. From my personal experience, if your application is out on the internet, people are looking to exploit it immediately, within an hour. There are botnets that are going to be checking for the known vulnerabilities in your software, so you have to catch those before they do. And some of them are really bad. You think of like Log4Shell that's so bad that they could just immediately detect it, get into your web server, and start to move laterally through your network just because you didn't check before you deployed something. So that's key, and also that you have to be doing it constantly because it used to be that a new vulnerability would be reported and it would be a couple of months before it would be exploited in the wild. But now we're seeing that these vulnerabilities are exploited within hours. So by the time you know about it, the bad actors do too. So it's a race.
Okay.
Don't boil the ocean. I use that adage so many times. Don't boil the ocean, especially working on a project in an organization. If you go ahead and say, I'm going to secure the entire supply chain, in 3 months, what have you actually accomplished? Because you've gone ahead and you've spread out your efforts and become bifurcated, where it's very difficult to show value to your leadership. So what return on investment are they actually getting? Well, we kind of created this pipeline. It's got pieces, but we haven't delivered anything. Versus, let's go ahead and let's deliver something. It may not be the whole story, but now you've shown business value that they might be able to invest even more in the next phase.
Rob, I'll give you the last word.
Yeah, I would say it's all about automation. Like probably everybody here, they don't have one developer or one application team. You've got 30, 50, 100, maybe 1,000 pipelines, who knows. And if you don't have automation, you're not going to be successful at any of this. And so pick 1 or 2 places where it makes sense to plug it in. Doesn't have to be everywhere at first, but run it through a high degree of automation and then let computers do the hard work. And then ruthless prioritization out the other end of that is how you can actually get work done.
Very good. Anne-Marie, Andy, Rob, thank you for your time. Folks, they'll be around for the rest of the day. If you have any questions, thank you all for this session.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.